I've done it.
Okay, so we're here today to save the world using zooarchaeology, and this conference idea started, I think, in December. Jackie came to Mary and I and said, let's have a conference called Zooarchaeology Saves the World. And then she sort of hushes and she goes, but I don't really think it can save the world. And me being a little more optimistic, I said, well, maybe we just need to think about different impacts we have on the world, and Mary said, well, let's see what other people have to say. And so that's why we're all here together, to think about the different impacts our research and teaching and outreach and different kinds of engagement have on the world. It is an online conference and it is a bunch of work, though not maybe as much as an in-person conference. It's actually been fairly successful. We want to thank all of our volunteers that are helping out at times. Today we have Beth, Morgan, and Harris, I think, who are all of our volunteers today. Tommy can't make it. Please mute when not contributing, because there's lots of people around at times. This is very much a pop-up conference. We have zero funds at all, and we're just using all kinds of free online tools. The only thing that is, I guess, not free is Cardiff University is providing the Zoom platform that can host so many people for such a long period of time. Otherwise, we're just using free tools. And so things do sometimes go wrong. Just give us some patience. Buzz one of us if you're lost or have a question. So one of the things that's clear is zooarchaeologists really do care about impact, not just impact factor. We have a whole lot of people that have showed up for these different sessions where we must be nearing 120 different people or so that have showed up live, and all of the asynchronous content we've created has been watched thousands of times or read thousands of times. And so there's a lot of people interested in the kind of impact we can have on the world out there. And our goal in this conference is very different from, say, most online conferences where you just tune in and tune out by sort of doing email and listening to people. A lot of the goal when we're here together is to have productive conversations in small groups. And so we're going to use, for a lot of today, the breakout room function. So in the lower right, you'll see the breakout room button, or you can click on the ... And from there, you can go to the breakout rooms, which are not open yet. Mary, do you want to, they'll appear in a second. There they go. And so if you scroll down, you can see different breakout rooms, and at different periods of the day, we have a different breakout room scheduled for different conversations. So for example, after Arati's keynote lecture, we have 3 different questions, and you can go to a different breakout room to discuss a different question. And same thing with our different discussion groups and workshops. And I think that's it. I'm going to turn it over to Mary, who's also going to give some intro on the methods that we're using for the conference.
Great, thanks, Win. I actually think you've covered quite a lot of what I was going to say, but I'll whiz through it quickly anyway, just in case you're not familiar with it. But yes, so we've also got the function, in case any of you would like to use them, of automatic captions. So down the bottom of your screen, if you'd like to have an automatic transcript come up while we speak. It's not always perfect, but hopefully it's better than nothing. So that's down the bottom of your screen. As Flint's already said, to join the breakout rooms, just click on the bottom where it says breakout rooms, and it will come up with a list of all the rooms available and how many people are in each one, so you can spread yourself somewhat evenly between discussions. To leave the breakout rooms and come back to the main room if you need to at any point, you can press leave room down in the bottom right-hand corner. And finally, as Flint's already said, if you could just keep yourself muted while other people are speaking, just because if there are quite a lot of people in one room, it can get a bit difficult if people are talking over each other. And lastly, if you have any questions or are unsure what to do or where you need to go at any point, just ask one of our volunteers or one of us for help. We all have ZooSTW in our names, and you can also send us a direct message in the chat. So if you go to your chat function, and in the drop-down menu, you can click on the person you want to send a direct message to. Otherwise, feel free to just shout out at any point. We're keeping it fairly casual and we want everyone to get involved, so don't be afraid to stick up your hand or give us a wave. So I think, Jackie, do you have anything else to add before we hand over to Arati?
I am recording this. I'm just letting you know. You're no doubt all aware of it because it's appeared on your screens. The recordings are mostly on our website and being hosted elsewhere. So you can go back and look at all the previous contributions. Once we get started and we go out to the breakout rooms. Meredith will share the schedule. Meredith or Flint will share kind of the schedule for today in the chat, and also kind of I guess a guide to all the breakout rooms. And within that, if you click on the links for the room you're in, the hyperlinks, it will kind of take you to the questions that we're thinking about. And you can also, once you go into kind of these Google documents with the questions, do all feel free to write notes on what you think or don't think, what you agree with or disagree with, because that's one of the ways, I guess, that we're trying to collate information. Beyond that, I don't think I've got any more information to share. It's very informal, so please, if you need anything, do just put your hand up and shout at us. Okay, so shall we start with our keynote presenter? Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, and screen sharing has been enabled. Cool. Yeah, so you can turn your cameras off whilst this is going on. It does help some people. We'll put them back on for the chat. Okay, we can see your screen.
Yeah. Okay, so I start.
Yeah, are you using a PDF then? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that okay, or you
No,
want me
no,
to...
that's fine. Can you make the PDF full screen? If not, we just see the top of your screen and down the side.
Full screen.
So press on the little double arrow at the bottom next to the blue. Ooh. Yeah, so there. Try. No, go down. I don't know why I'm pointing at my screen. The next one over. No. No. Can you see the one that's got arrows going in like two directions?
The
like
second
that.
from the right. The second
Yeah,
from the right.
second from the right.
Right.
Right. Keep going right.
No.
Nope.
To the
Keep
right.
going right.
The button that is second from the right, Arati. It's like two arrows.
That
yeah.
one. No,
Nope.
next one.
One over.
Next one. No, other way.
Right.
Well, maybe it's your left. No, next one. That one. Yay. Brilliant. Thank you.
We don't use Zoom so much. So
that's okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Now you may start.
Yes. So a very good afternoon to all of you. And before I begin, I would like to thank Flint, Jacque, Meredith for giving me this opportunity to share my research here on this very interesting conference. Unfortunately, I really apologize that I could not attend any of your previous sessions because of some other commitments. I've been traveling for fieldwork and many other things. So I'm so sorry. I wanted to attend, but I just could not make it. So I begin with my talk on going from villages to cities, looking at the human-animal relationships during the Indus Valley civilization. So my next, yeah. So yeah, with this, yeah. So Indus Valley civilization, I think most of people should be knowing about it. And it was one of the earliest civilizations in South Asia, which spanned roughly between 2600 BC to 1900 BC. But the excavations and explorations, which started with the excavations at Mohenjo-daro and Harappa in the early 1920s, went on to, further many more excavations where a large number of sites have been explored, excavated. And today the amount of data which has come out from this civilization is quite enormous. And it has revealed a lot of more new information. It tells us that it has a much larger geographical spread than was thought before. It is not only confined to the Indus Valley, the Indus River system, but it goes on all extending into northern India as well as in Western India, and further it goes right up till the Indo-Iranian borderlands. So this large civilization is characterized by the rich material culture which has been excavated. We have these wonderful objects which have come from it. You have stone objects, stone beads, very different kinds of beautifully made pottery. It also has a very good social organization, which is reflected in the monumental architecture like the Great Bath, the granary, and its water management system at Dholavira, and so many aspects have been revealed through these excavations. Religious affinities also have been revealed to a certain extent. The script unfortunately remains undeciphered, so a lot of information still lies hidden because of that. It also has shown that the civilization was interacting with regions all around it. It had its both internal trade as well as external trade, going as far as maybe the Arabian Peninsula as well as Mesopotamia. So, but this such a big, large civilization with a large geographical spread, it's continuity right up till beyond 1900 BC, coming till say the 1300 BC, has always remained an enigma. Its origins are still debated upon, and also its decline, which happened somewhere around 1300 BC, is also continues to be debated. There are various factors attributed. Now, in this whole gamut of information which has come out, we find that a large amount of animal remains have been excavated, and interestingly, they were given attention right from the excavations at Mohenjo-daro and Harappa. And since then, in fact, it initiated a lot of what you can say, in a way, it initiated a lot of archaeological research in the Indian subcontinent. As you would all know that in 1947, India got its independence from the British, and it separated into Pakistan and what is present-day India. So in the bargain, a lot of sites of belonging to the civilization came to be excavated, and with that, a large number of animal remains also came to be exposed. And because of the interest which was being shown in these remains, it really triggered off archaeological research. Now, one of the best ways probably to understand what was the relationship between the humans and the animals during the civilization, I think would be looking at these various sources which we have obtained from this, various large excavations. For example, there are lots of objects which are made from bone, shell, horn, corals. You have terracotta figurines, animal figurines. You have depictions of animals like cattle and wild animals, fish being depicted on pottery. Then you have so many different kinds of seals which have got animal impressions on them. But I think the best way probably and the closest would be to actually look at their remains which come from these excavations, and they would be used to tell us so much about what was happening with these animals in the past and how they came to be there. And it is because of these archaeological studies which were initiated in the Indian subcontinent, beginning with Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, that today we are able to do a large number of sites have been studied for their remains. So here you can see this long list of sites which have been studied, which have the faunal remains have been come out as reports in publications, and there are various organizations which have been involved in the study. You have the Survey of India, you have the veterinary science, and you have the zoology departments in various universities, two very important institutions, MS University, Baroda, and my own university, Deccan College. We have been really instrumental in carrying out research. We have a well-established archaeozoology laboratory in my department, which has been functioning since the 1970s. And we have studied a large number of sites from belonging to this IVC. Now, when we start with looking at the animals which were being used during this civilization, I think one has to we'll have to go back to one of the earliest sites, that would be Mehergarh. It is not an Harappan site, but it was a Neolithic site, and it is the only site which was there today in South Asia, which is going back to the 7th millennium BC, where we start seeing the early appearance of domesticated animals. And the early levels show a lot of hunting of wild animals, but slowly people started keeping herds of cattle, sheep, goat, and they had their various burials with, skeletons wearing different kinds of ornaments and things like that. So this Mehergarh is always used as a yardstick when we are trying to understand the development of these human-animal relationships during the IBC. Now, going from there, when we come to the region of Gujarat, that is in Western India, we have a large number of sites which were explored just after the partition in 1947, and many of them have been studied for their faunal remains. And these sites have yielded so much of information going from right from, say, the early beginnings of the civilization, somewhere during the early Harappan times, going right up till the late Harappan times, that is spanning a time period between, say, 4000 BC onwards till, say, nearly 2000 BC, this time span. Similarly, we have another area which has also now been worked upon very extensively, and that is northern India. That is the parts of, present-day Punjab, Haryana, and Rajasthan area. Adjoining is the Pakistan region, and it is here that a large number of sites were explored, mainly along the Ghaggar river system, which is supposed to be the ancient Saraswati. And here they reported a large number of settlements. So people started excavating in these areas and carrying out explorations. And now we know that today, with excavation of sites like Birana, Rakhigadi, and Banavali, and Kalibangan, we know that the IBC probably started much earlier than thought before. And it can be, and especially sites like Birana, from my own research, where we have supplied dates and we have done archaeological analysis, it shows that it could be somewhere quite contemporary with Mehergarh. And here we can see that at Birana, we have the earliest levels, which are predating the actual Harappan period, are much earlier. And in this time period, the people were sort of living in subterranean dwellings. But then we have evidence of them keeping cattle, sheep, goat, and these are all domesticated cattle which they are keeping. And we were able to identify and say that with confidence that it is the zebu, that is your humped cattle. And later on, these people slowly started building structures over when they started coming towards the early Harappan levels and the mature Harappan period, when the settlement really became bigger. In the mature Harappan times, and they were also carrying out hunting. So this region today is really very important if one really wants to study the relationship and how it has sort of evolved, through many cultural sequences, and especially for understanding this kind of human-animal relationship in this particular region. So at most of these Harappan sites, our data shows that a majority of the animals are coming because of they are being intentionally brought. They are being brought for specific kind of exploitation. Of course, the foremost would be being brought for subsistence as a part of their diet. And, they were also being brought for raw material, for production of, secondary products like getting milk, ghee, curds, and so many other things. Dung was also being used. So that was one of the prime reasons for a number of animals to have been exploited at these sites. But we also see some accidental, inclusions in the deposits, which may be because they might have been living alongside the site or might have been, brought in through some other accidental incorporation. So coming to the chief animals which were being, sort of exploited for basically for subsistence, we can see that these are the most commonly used animals. We see them being reflected at almost all the sites. If you take whether it is in northern India or whether it is in western India, you go even to some of the sites in Pakistan, for example, at Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, and even sites like Balakot, and you will find the same kind of representation is there. And here we find that, the buffalo cattle remains the foremost to be exploited. but we also see the presence of the water buffalo, which is not that common. But next to cattle, another very commonly exploited animal was the sheep and goat, and then pigs somehow get introduced only during the mature Harappan period. So we find that the Harappans were basically, their whole subsistence was based on these domestic animals, and they were keeping good herds of cattle as well as carrying out on the side sheep goat pastoralism. Today also we see in South Asia, especially parts of Gujarat, if you go, or Rajasthan, you find present day pastoralists herding buffaloes, camels, sheep goat, and even cattle. So there is some sort of a continuity even till present times. So here the cattle is one of the most dominant animals to be exploited in this whole civilization. And as we go towards the mature Harappan levels, which was the most prosperous period of the Indus Valley civilization, at most of the sites, maximum representation is of this humped, cattle, which is also known as the zebu. We have been able to identify by this kind of a bifid, thoracic spine, and from this we are able to say that this zebu is there. And we are also able to identify it from the eye sockets which we have got, which are very, very similar to the Bos indicus and not Bos taurus. So here we find that cattle was also, besides being probably, it was used as meat, definitely. But besides that, we find that a good number of animals were also being kept in their very old age with very, very highly worn teeth. And these might have been used in agricultural operations, traction, and so on. And this particular cattle, we find that, was not just of economic use, but throughout the whole region, we find that it did attain some kind of a, maybe respect, a lot of socio-religious significance, because we also find a lot of bull figurines associated with many of these sites. So these are some of the wild animals. So it is not that only cattle and sheep, goat, though being most dominant, we find at many of them bones of such wild animals, which are also present today in many parts of the Indian subcontinent. You have the very large bison, that is the gaur, and you have the nilgai, which is the blue bull. This is one of the most commonly found animal in this whole area. Then you have antelopes, you have the gazelles, and you have the spotted deer, another very commonly. So hunting was also being carried out at some of these sites. And at Virana, we have noticed that in the early levels, there was really a good focus on hunting of these wild animals, where younger animals were being brought in at a very, very young age, probably as meat. Besides hunting and keeping of these terrestrial mammals mostly, we find that the people were also engaged in a lot of fishing activities, especially at many of the coastal sites. We find use of, marine fisheries. We see presence of marine fish has been recorded. We see presence of fish hooks, which show that deep sea fishing was being done. And you have like evidence for, marine fish coming from sites like very inland located sites like Harappa or even Dholavira for that matter. And besides fishing, we also see a good collection of other aquatic resources like, fresh water, turtles. There are at least 3-4 varieties of freshwater turtles, may have contained good amount of water, as revealed from the presence of these shell remains, as well as the shells which are there. At that time, say 4,000, 5,000 years ago, these aquatic resources, both fish, shells, and a lot of coastal sites, especially in Gujarat, were engaged in using shellfish resources as food. probably supplementing their diet, where it might have been more or less more cattle based, but this was also an additional supplement. Now, coming to the use of certain animals as raw material for making different kinds of objects of utility, for ornamentation, adornment, and things like that. So we have these two very large animals, the rhinoceros and the elephant. We find very, very few bones of these animals at these sites. These are where they have been recorded, very, very few as compared to the number of sites where material has been studied. And we find that they are quite well depicted on many of the seals. Both elephant impressions are there as well. And definitely during the mature Harappan period, both these animals might have been used for their, the ivory, which was, because we do find a lot of ivory objects in many of these, especially the large urban centers, as they are known as the large cities of, say, Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, Lothal, where you do find a lot of ivory objects being used. Besides use of bone, which is also seen at other places where you find bone points being made and needles and awls and other objects, we find that another very, very major activity which the Harappans were involved was in shell working. They were in a way fond of shells, but only a few certain kind of shells. And these definitely had some kind of meaning for them. They were associated with some kind of a status, because they were also used for ornamentation purposes. But many of the shell objects were probably used in some kind of ritualistic aspects. For example, these kind of shell ladles. Then you have these certain points. Then you have these bangles, which may have been used by both male and female, because we do have skeletons which have been showing. And also children might have also been using these bangles. So shell had played a very important role, and shell was mainly this particular shell, that is Turbinella pyrum, and this particular other conch shell, Chicoreus ramosus. These were two very important shells. They were, collected from the Gulf of Kutch in Gujarat, and they were taken to many of these sites, hinterland, where they were worked upon and made into different kinds of objects like these. So you had major shell working sites like, Mohenjo-daro, Dholavira, Kundasi, Bagasra. So this is the site of Khirsara, again in Kutch, where it is supposed to have been some kind of a factory site during the mature Harappan period, where they have been able to expose this very large number of shells, which were in various stages of being worked. So shell working constituted a very important activity, and their whole economy also may have depended upon it, because many, especially the Gujarat region, even today is not a very, very, it comes under the semi-arid part, and a lot of their economy may have depended upon this particular shell resources for, making objects and then sending it to other places. Some of them may have even traveled as far as Mesopotamia, because at Mesopotamia, certain shell ladles have been identified, and they are probably supposed to be of Indus origin. Now, coming to the use of, whether these animals, some of them, like the bullocks, were they really used for traction, for pulling carts? Because when you look at this big, vast spread of this civilization, and what were their whole transportation system like, that really leaves to your imagination, because they were using waterways. We have depictions of boats and things like that, but a large amount of, whatever the trade exchange which was being done was done over land. And here we find that a lot of bullock cart wheels made in terracotta. These are all toy cart wheels. Then you have these kind of bullock carts which have been, made, and models are available, which do give us some insight into that this might have been one of the most commonly used mode of transportation, and bullocks might have been one of the most important animals to have been used for doing such kind of activities. Similarly, buffaloes also could have been used. Now, these are some of the animals which continue to be used today in South Asia, especially bullock carts are so common even today in rural India. You go to any part of India, you will find them in being used very commonly in many of the villages. Now, as regards another animal which could have been considered is the horse. Horse is very enigmatic. We have very, very few bones reported from these sites. It is sort of embroiled in a lot of controversy. It is associated with the Aryan debate, and so it is an animal which is so far not been worked upon so much, mainly because we really have not been able to get that much of remains of this particular animal. Whatever few remains were reported from, say, sites like Kotada, they were identified as horse by Sandor Bocconi, a very senior archaeozoologist. And but Richard Meadow and others, they feel that much of the horse remains, whatever we are getting from these Indus Valley sites, are probably belonging to the wild ass or the donkeys, and it's not the actual horse. So the horse always still will remain debated upon till more discoveries are made and more research is done on this particular animals. And interestingly, we do not have any kind of depictions of horse in any of the seals, or there are no figurines which are depicting this particular animal. Now, other than being used as food, which formed a very main part of the important role of these animals at many of these sites, we see that some of these animals may have been used as pet. This is a very beautiful figurine which comes from the site of Rakhigarhi. It shows a dog with a collar, and similar ones have been also reported from some other sites also. And it does show that during the mature Harappan period, we have presence of, say, animals like the domestic cat has been reported, and we have these dogs being reported. So animals being kept as pets for security reasons is quite a probability. Then we also see, as I had said earlier, that the humped cattle had definitely been given some kind of a social status, and that is why we see it in the form of large number of figurines. And these figurines, if you see, continue into the later periods also. Just after the demise of the Indus Valley civilization, we are seeing it in the other Chalcolithic and the historic period. We see the use of this particular animal for so many reasons, and it does acquire a very, very high social status. Then there are these other animals which we have been able to identify, like we have identified this Panthera pardus, wolf, fox, mongoose, hare, which may have served as predators, commensal animals in and around the sites, living in and around, and being a part of the settlements at certain times. Now, coming to the kind of what happens, were these animals ever being having a status when the people died? Yes, to a certain extent. We do not find very large burials with the animals being buried along with them, but from many of the cemeteries, especially in Harappa, then Rakhigarhi, Parmana, we have been able to see that some of the female skeletons have been found to be wearing shell bangles. And this is also quite interesting. We also see the presence of shells, both of marine shells as well as this freshwater shells, being placed in some of these burials. This is, of course, from Rakhigarhi. At Harappa also, they have got some of the marine shells like Anadira being placed with some kind of a pigment in some of the graves. And at Rakhigarhi, again, we have exposed burials where, along with the skeletons, we do get burial pottery, and also we have been able to get faunal remains. And most of these faunal remains have been found to be belonging to the cattle. Now, with so much of data coming in and this information about how these animals were being used by these Harappans, it can just go on and on and on, because we are, every time there's a new excavation and there's new material coming out, and there will be always some new insights, new perspectives altogether. But an attempt was made to really now try and understand that this particular civilization is, why did it suddenly collapse or decline? And many factors were attributed, like there has been supposed to have been some kind of violence, and there could have been, so many other factors were involved in the demise of this civilization. One of the most commonly cited factor is climate, that there was some kind of climate deterioration by which right from say 1900 BC onwards, the civilization slowly started deteriorating. We see a lot of collapse in all aspects. The structures became more, they were not so well made. Construction was not so good. Pottery was not very well made. Even the material objects also start declining. So an overall decline is seen. And here, that is why it was thought that, we should try and see if we can use some of these animal remains as proxies for understanding this kind of climate change. Because previously people have been working on this, many of the climatologists, and to understand this climate change. But most of the proxies which they have selected are mostly, they're either ocean cores or sediment cores or pollen records, and very less, proxies have been actually used from the archaeological sites themselves. So that is why we decided at the site of Birana, we decided to look at these animal teeth, the cattle teeth, which is the most common. We started with bones, but with our conditions of being semi-arid, arid, the collagen, preservation is not very good. So our work research suffered there, but then with teeth we did get good, resolution, and our information came out very good. So we were able to show that, if you look at the cultural sequence at Birana, it starts somewhere in the Hakraware culture, which is now going as, contemporary, say with the Mehergarh somewhere around the 7th millennium BC. And then it continues right up till mature Harappan period. The site continues to be occupied. So we were able to show that how the site, the monsoon record, which we were able to generate from this isotopic signatures, what we got, we were able to show that in these two periods, the monsoon was definitely very good, very, very high intensification of monsoon. The rivers had a good amount of water, and that is the Ghaggar River, along whose banks the site was located. There were many other sites also located along its banks, because post mature Harappan, we find that many of these settlements along this Ghaggar River got abandoned. And when we looked at our record, it shows that post early Harappan, when we start coming to the mature Harappan period, somehow there is a deterioration in the climate. The monsoon is also slowly failing, and by this mature Harappan period, it is really going to a very dry, arid phase. So this was one work which we did in 2016, and it was also published in Nature Scientific Reports. And this was what we had been able to show, a very good oxygen isotope record. Another site which we decided to take up also. This work, of course, is not my work alone. This was done in conjunction with the Archaeological Survey of India. Both these sites were both Birana and the present Dholavira, which I'm talking about, were excavated by Archaeological Survey of India, and our stable isotope work was done with IIT Kharagpur. And at Dholavira, this is another very interesting site. It is located in Western India, in Gujarat, in the very dry, arid region of the Kutch region. It is located in a very vast salt flat land. And it is very interesting that how did this particular, such a large city survive in this region? When you look at the landscape, then nothing grows. There are no people living around it today. And it's a very dry, barren, completely inhospitable area. So here you have this huge settlement covering nearly more than 3 hectares. And it has been, the radiocarbon dates which we have been able to get, the AMS dates which we have, have been able to show that the civilization, the site started somewhere around the, in the 4th millennium BC, and it continued right up till say 1300 BC when it sort of was abandoned. And so for this, what we did was we selected this particular shell. Now, these shells were being collected by the Dholavira people as a part of their food. This was a brackish water shell, and this is also very interesting because today there are no mangrove swamps around Dholavira. It is completely barren, and whatever the mangroves would be on the coast, which is quite far away. But here at Dholavira, we were getting this. So our stable isotope research, which we did on these particular shell, showed that when during its main occupation period, somewhere around the 3rd millennium to the 2nd millennium BC, we find that at Dholavira, there are 2 streams which were flowing adjoining it. They definitely had a good amount of fresh water, and that is why we also see a good amount of freshwater shells coming into these in this particular settlement, which were used as food and for making different kinds of objects, and including this shell. So our research shows that there were definitely mangroves which were growing alongside quite close to the settlement, from which these shells could be collected by the inhabitants as food. But as we come to the the later part of the cultural period, that is somewhere around say post 2000 BC, we see that there was a deterioration in climate. There was severe aridity, because of which freshwater inputs were completely getting depleted, and the water was becoming more and more marine and brackish, which due to which many of these mangroves could not survive. They perished, and also the water resources for the site also may have declined. And this is one reason which, due to which this particular settlement also sort of declined, and it gets abandoned by around say 1300 BC. So this was another work where we try to use such kind of shells to understand the climate change at this particular site. And we are still continuing to work mostly on archaeological shells from some other settlements, both in northern and western India, to understand more, impact of climate on these settlements and whatever the response which these Indus people had. So to conclude, I would like to say that definitely our whatever archaeological work which we have been doing so far, at least in India, has been able to, it has impacted the present day Indian society. It is able to tell the people about, how people have been using their animals in the past, and a lot of lessons will have to be learned about understanding, climate change in the present day scenario, where places are again getting very, very arid. There is desertification occurring because of overgrazing. So some of these things, the insights could be used as lessons for, sort of helping our present become a little better. So with this, thank you. I hope I have not exceeded my time. And yeah.